All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our second half of our show. We got to talk to Rob Lapham. He talked about the omnibus bill out there that, well, makes my head spin when thinking about over a 2,000 plus page bill that just got passed. It puts us more and more in debt. As we keep kicking our debt down the road for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to pay, eventually it's going to come back and bite America in the hiney. It really is, and, well, it's not good. But anyway, that's another story. Right now we're talking about the here and now and talking about car repair, talking about, well, normally Brian Armstead calls this time of day, but he is at the New York Auto Show, and I was reading yesterday, I don't know where I was reading it, where Volkswagen is really flipped it upside down up there. They've done something that kind of caught them all off guard. Volkswagen's introducing a truck. That's right. Not a bad looking truck either.
Like a pickup truck.
It's a pickup truck,
for consumer, for regular drivers.
Yeah, regular, honest to goodness, everyday drivers, mom and pop, soccer moms, things like that. It's a truck, and it looks a lot, to my opinion, it looked a lot like a Honda. The Honda Ridgeline, I think that's the truck. Kind of looked like that to me, but that's just my opinion of it. But, I'm sure Volkswagen has a unique perspective on everything they've done. I mean, sometimes when you work on Volkswagens are different the way they put their platforms together versus, say, Chevrolet or a Honda or a Toyota. They're all a little different. And Volkswagens, you have to think differently. You do. When you go to repair a Volkswagen, you just don't plug a scanner in, get a code off of it, and say, okay, that's what that means. No, on Volkswagens, if you plug a code in, you get it, it just points you in the area. It just says, here's the area. Now you have to narrow it down to where you think it's at. And it can be done. It's a procedure that they have designed to narrow it down from the certain area down to pinpoint it. But on all cars, it's that way. But some are more generalized than others. Sometimes they just say, okay, you've got a problem in this circuit, and it's up to you to figure it out. Where the problem is. A perfect example, what were we working on? I was working on a Colorado. Customer's complaint is, I got a whole bunch of codes on there in my dash, and it's everything from a exhaust solenoid that is controlled by oil pressure. And I've said anytime you get a code that says P00 whatever, it means it's anything but electrical. And I've always believed that. I really have until this job. I had a car, this car came in, it had a brand new one of those parts in it. Been put in about 3,000 miles ago. Well, the first thing, when you go research on the book, it says, okay, you've got a problem with this code. And there was also a problem with the fuel delivery system. Something was wrong with the fuel delivery. It had running rich codes in it, running lean codes in it. It had bunches of codes for fuel delivery, along with this code that had to do with the way the car was, the cam phaser, the cam solenoid. Was working, and it had been changed. And I told the customer, I said, well, in my opinion, what kind of oil are you running in it first? And he said, just regular oil. I said, that's a big no-no. These cars are really designed to run on full synthetic oil or a minimum of a synthetic blend. It's a lot more, has more lubricity. That's really an honest to goodness word, lubricity, to allow that solenoid to move mechanically back and forth. So when we hear or see that code P00 whatever, that tells us it's a mechanical problem. And it can be anything from oil pressure to a timing chain slip or whatever, but it's never electrical until the car yesterday came in. And this one came in, had that code. And I checked it out, we changed the oil, put it together, make sure it actuated, took it off the car, it actuated fine. But I kept getting a code talking about fuel delivery. And I'd have my scanner, and it would show the fuel pressure, which on this top model, you have a fuel pressure sensor that's on the line, and it says this is what your fuel pressure is. And so it tells the computer, another computer, to maintain the fuel pump at a certain speed. It's got a programmable fuel pump control module. That's how this works. So you got a fuel pump, you got another computer that controls the fuel pump, and then to control the fuel pump, to send signal to it, you've got a pressure sensor that actually determines what the pressure is. It wants to be somewhere between 43 to 50 psi, give or take. And somewhere in that area is where it's supposed to be. So when you give it more gas, it just increases a little bit, and depending. But it doesn't put a big demand on the pump to make the pump last a lot longer. Before, pumps just ran at a certain speed constantly, and they just wore out over a period of time. Well, they've designed these where they don't wear out quite as, in theory, they don't wear out quite as bad. So when you get this code, I think it was a P069E. If you ever get that, that can be anything from running too rich, running too lean. It can be it could be a bad fuel pump, a fuel pump control module. That's usually what a leaky injector. It can be wiring, but very rarely is it wiring. But what the funny thing was, when you see a P0017, that means it's anything but electrical. So you say, well, that must be, they're not even connected. But every time I got that P069E, I got that P0017. And I said, what's wrong with this car? So what I ended up doing was I was noticing the scanner would read 0 volts, 0 PSI. And sometimes it'd be 45 PSI, 50 PSI. Sometimes it'd bump up to 80 or 90 PSI. And I'm going, well, there must be something wrong with the fuel pump controller doing that, because there's no way that my pressure is doing that. So to verify it, I actually hooked up a mechanical gauge and where it could see what the fuel pressure is. And the fuel pressure never dropped below 43 to 45. I'd see it fluctuate a little bit, but it never dropped to 0. So that told me immediately, hey, I got false information. That information is not, I'm not actually seeing that really happen on a actual mechanical fuel pressure gauge. My mechanical gauge is reading 43, 44. It fluctuates a little bit. It's supposed to, but it doesn't go to 0. But my scanner says 0. Well, the first thing you think of must be, a bad processor. So I get another processor and I start do research on it, and it says this processor is a problem area. There's a recall on it at one time. Make sure you check that. Make sure you do this. There's a new programming on it for this problem, this P069E. And I'm going, geez, all this problem just to make a fuel pump. And you got to remove the spare tire to get to it too. That's another wonderful job. Anyway, so you get it all inside there, put it back together, and everything looks wonderful for about 30 minutes. Back to my fuel pressure, it's nice and stable. Then all of a sudden it goes down to 0 again. Back up to 45, back up to 100, back down to 45, back to 0. I'm going, and then the light comes on. And when the light comes on, I get this P0017. Now, before this light came on, I drove this car for 30 minutes at P0017, which is, that deals with the timing chain, that deals with the timing, that deals with the solenoid that actually advances or retards the timing. It never came on when it was working right. But as soon as it saw that P069E, boom, both codes would light up like a Christmas tree. And I go, okay, this is strange. It's not my module, so what can it be? So I said, okay, maybe it's this pressure sensor. So I had another Colorado here with the same exact part on it, and I go swap them. I swap them, put one part on it, both of them work perfect now. Well, that must have just been a bad connection at that sensor. I just can't understand that. I looked at them, they look clean. I didn't see anything wrong with them. Oh, well, what the heck? See what happens. So I drive it around, everything's perfect. No codes, it runs great. The fuel pressure is marvelous. I don't see it going to 0. It's maintaining between 43 to 45 PSI in that area, just perfect. Then I tell my wife, I said, look, go drive the car, because I said cars are scared of me. They won't act up when I'm in the car because they know I can figure them out. And somehow or another, it seems like they just don't want to act up. But if I give them to my wife, boy, she'll drive it, and the cars aren't scared of her, and they will tear up and show their little faults or whatever. And she said she drove it about 3/4 of the way to the bank, and then all of a sudden it acted up. She brought it back, and I said, let me figure out what's wrong with it. And I said, did it run good for a while? She said, yeah, it ran great for almost there. Then all of a sudden it acted up. Grabbed it, came back, looked at it, plugged my scanner in, those same 2 codes. I went, dadgum, what did I mess up on? And then I noticed my fuel pressure was dropping to 0. And then I looked underneath there, and it was still at 0. It wouldn't move, it wouldn't come. And I know I got fuel pressure, the car is running, the truck is running. So I grabbed a hold of that wire where that pressure regulator is, started wiggling. And when I wiggled, all of a sudden it went up to 80 pounds and went to 0. I said, ooh, I got a problem right there. So I took the wires and started pulling on them slightly. And when I did, one of the brown wire, which is the 5-volt reference wire on this model, pulled apart. And I said, aha. So when I put that pressure sensor on there and spun it and put it back on my connection, it made a good contact temporarily. So what the problem happened to be is a wiring problem in the harness. And there is nowhere in any of my things on the internet that talks about that problem being there. That even, as a matter of fact, all data doesn't even show where the pressure sensor is on this model. I just happen to know it has one. And I'm going, no one talked about that being a problem. But common sense and being able to know how things work and how things read gave me an idea where to begin. And then as I started talking to the customer about this car, come to find out they just recently bought the car. And that was the reason I believe they sold the cars. They couldn't ever fix this problem. And sometimes wiring harnesses have problems. That's why the wiggle test, which was developed to work on Ford vehicles back in the 80s, that's how we had to find problems on Fords. They didn't have a data stream. We had to wiggle things. We had to just slowly wiggle, make sure things worked or didn't work. That's how we, believe it or not, that's how we fixed them back then, was wiggle test. And that's what I ended up having to do, was kind of a wiggle test on that circuit. Found the problem, took it apart, took this section, took the connector apart, soldered, added a piece of wire to it, soldered it, heat shrink tape, fixed it correctly. No butt connectors, no. Please, people that twist wires together or put butt connectors together, don't let them work on your car, because that will cause nothing but a headache a year down the road. If you put a butt connector on there, it's like putting a 1 mega ohm resistor in there in about a year's time, because you've got aluminum and copper going together with oxygen in the air. You get a massive resistor over a period of time. And when you're dealing with less than 5 volts on some circuits, it doesn't take much to drive a technician crazy. And I think that was one of the reasons they sold that vehicle and got rid of it to some unsuspecting person, because they couldn't quite figure it out. But when I saw the P0017, like I said, they told me it was anything but electrical, and it just made a believer out of me that nope, sometimes when you rob that 5-volt circuit and it loses that 5-volt circuit from another sensor, and maybe that's causing the engine to stumble a little bit, and for a split second maybe it sees the oil pressure drop or something, and it might be what caused this problem. Is that the engine running rough caused the oil pressure to drop for a split second to set that code on it. And it wasn't anything mechanical other than the fact that the engine maybe stumbled a little bit and dropped it down, but that's an example where it was electrical. And it kind of like, that's an interesting. So there's not a day goes by that I don't learn something. I'm serious. There's not a day goes by I don't learn something that's interesting, that's new. That's something that I can help my other technicians out, because I'm going to write this article up. I'm going to send it to Identifix and say, here's what we found when these two codes came in here, because nowhere on Google, nowhere, anywhere I went, it talked about those two codes being put together causing this problem. So it's something that I can pass on for other technicians who won't pull their hair out trying to find out a common problem. Hey, this is what makes this business so interesting. I mean, it's not like it used to be. Well, it's far from what it used to be back in the 70s and 80s, where it's just far from it. It's completely different than it used to be, but I sure enjoy it. Anyway, I got George calling, and he's got 06 Silverado. George, I don't have much time. I may have to answer your question off air, but what is your question before we go off air?
Well, I'm having the rack and pinion change today.
Okay.
And they, according to the people that supplying the parts, they recommend to put a filter in that system. What does that filter do?
That filter collects any materials that are being piped before it gets back to the pump. You put it on the return side, not the high side, on the return line, and it catches all the materials. I put filters all the time when I change a power steering rack. I do it as a safety, as an insurance policy, to keep it from getting pieces of trash into the valve body of the rack and pinion, causing me to have to do the job again for free. So,
that's correct, and I understand that clear, because they give a lifetime warranty on that rack and pinion.
if you put a filter in it. If you don't, they ain't going to.